Hello everyone, my name is Marcus Nordqvist. I'm the CTO of Queenslab and Happy at Work, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about client integration with Microsoft Graph API and how you can use it to get user information and other information from your Active Directory. Also how you can add users and Office 365 licenses to your Active Directory. I've been talking a lot about Svelte, so this time I'm not gonna do any front-end stuff. Instead, I'm gonna just show very briefly how to go into Azure portal, set up an app registration with a client secret, and not use the regular OAuth2 flow to let the user get a token through the normal Microsoft login flow. Instead, we're just going to use the client secret on an app registration, and we're going to assign some permissions. And I'm going to just use the portal, the user interface today, but you can also do it using the Azure CLI, obviously. What is the point of this? Well, in my case, I'm doing sort of a back office solution for Queenslab, so that anybody could just add a new user. We have consultants coming in and working with us, and new people starting all the time. So I want to be able to have an API support a front-end solution so that I can give not technical people, maybe HR people and other non-developers, the possibility to just enter some information, click a button, and have the user added to the infrastructure, to Active Directory and to Office 365. Obviously have a license assigned to them so that they can have a mailbox, and also maybe other stuff, maybe other integrations that I want to have afterwards, such as I want to invite them to Slack, maybe send them an email, maybe onboarding stuff. So that is my my use case. But what I'm doing now is simply just getting information from the Graph API. I'm just playing around with it a little bit to see what I can do and how I can interact with the Azure Active Directory. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into app registrations. And you can see I have a few already here. And then I'm going to set up a new app registration. This goes a little bit fast, but I hope you can follow. I'm gonna set up a back office registration, app registration. I'm gonna click register, and you can just take notice that I use accounts in this organizational directory only, Queenslab only, single tenant. All right, so we've created now an application registration, and instantly I'm gonna copy a few things. I'm gonna copy application ID, which is also called client ID. Yes, and I'm also gonna copy the directory ID or tenant ID. We will need these later, so copy them out and make sure that you write which one is which. I'm also gonna set up a few API permissions. And then you do this by clicking API permissions, and you can click add permissions. You can use the Azure CLI to do many of these things as well, but I'm just going to use the user interface for now because it's just, pretty straightforward and just goes pretty quick. I know already which permissions I need, but if you need help to find out, you can go into the documentation of the Graph API. There is a beta version available, but I'm using the stable 1.0 version of the API, and there is a reference list here. For whatever endpoint you would like to use, there is a list of privileges or permissions that you need. And you can read about them here. So in my case, I know which ones I need already, and I'm gonna set them up. So I know that I need, first of all, there's a lot of different permissions that you can add for many other things than just the Graph API, but I'm gonna use the Graph API, and I'm gonna use application permissions because that's what it is. I'm using a web API. I don't want to use a signed in user flow. Instead, I'm gonna use application permissions and log in silently using client secret. So that is a little bit different. Okay, I know that I will need something called directory, and I know that I will read write all. So I'll add that permission. You also see that you get an exclamation point here saying that this permission has not been granted for QueensLab, and you can solve this in a number of ways. One is to just grant admin consent for QueensLab for the entire organization, and I will do that in this case, but I will wait until I've added all my permissions. Another way of doing it is just to leave it like this and have the first time around when you're trying to use them, you as an administrator can just log in using the regular OAuth flow and sign the consent for your organization. But instead, I just feel that this is easier, and you can look up how to do it in many other ways. You can also use the CLI to do this as well. I'm gonna add some more permissions that I know that I need. I need user, and I need the user read write, and I also need organization read write. Obviously, it's very important that you know what you're doing and that you secure your API from use when you're doing this, because I'm giving this API quite a few permissions now to do a lot of actions inside my Active Directory. So make sure that your API is not open to anyone for use, but that you actually secure your API. I'm not going to go through that in detail. I just assume that you know how to do that. Use identity server or whatever you would like to do, or you implement your own OAuth flow. I think this is all I need. There was another thing that was playing around with the people permission as well, but I'm not gonna use that, I think. So I'm just gonna grant admin consent for QueensLab at this moment. Okay, great. I've granted for QueensLab all these permissions now. But I have this app registration, but still there's no way to log in because I haven't set up any client secret. So I will need to do that as well. I'm gonna call it back office web API. And I'm gonna use the recommended 6 months expiry date. And this is the last time. If I close down Azure now, I won't be able to see the client secret anymore. So I'm just going to copy this. And don't worry, I know that maybe you can see this, but I will remove it. So it's not really that I will leave it like this. I will remove this client secret and I will use another one before I post this video. And you should obviously keep this secret secure, and if you're using a password manager, then that might be an option. All right, so I've set that up, and of course now we can take a look at the code. I'm gonna go back to the overview, and you can see that we have the client ID, the tenant ID, and the secret here. Those are relevant for logging in using logging in as an application now. We don't need to use the secret ID. Sorry, you don't need to worry about that, and you shouldn't confuse that with the client ID, which sometimes happen. All right. Moving over to code then. Let's take a look at what we have here. I have something called an Active Directory Controller. But before we move into that, I'm gonna just take a look at the local settings.json. In this settings file, I have client ID, client secret, and tenant ID. If you've followed so far, then you know that we've copied all these ones, and so I can just copy these in, and these would be environmental variables probably, or set in key vault storage or something else. Obviously, when you're not running locally, this is just a proof of concept, more or less, to run this web API locally and test it out a little bit. I've set up this local settings.json file like this in program.cs, and I've set up this section to or configured it using this class Graph API settings that has 3 properties: client ID, client secret, and tenant ID. This is probably nothing new to you. And I'm injecting this settings, or these settings in my Graph API proxy service. And here I have some code that might be of interest. First of all, what we're doing here is creating an app using the confidential client application builder. And if we take a look at this confidential client application builder, you can see that it implements the abstract application builder. And there are several implementations of the abstract application builder. This is just one of them, but I'm gonna use this one because of the way we're logging in with a tenant ID and with a client secret. You can also see that we're using a client credential provider, and we're passing the app as a parameter to it. Then we're using the client provider as a parameter when we're instantiating the Graph service client, which we'll be using to interact with the Graph API. You see that the base URL here is the version 1.0. All right, so I have a bunch of methods here. Some of them are, this is a pretty trashy solution so far. I'm just playing around a little bit, but there are a few of these methods that are important. You see they're quite small, and it's quite easy actually to work with this API. There's one, this actually is not the best naming for this method, because I'm not getting the user details I did before, but now I'm getting people that has interacted somehow with the user that has this user ID. But let's take a look at the more interesting methods. One of them is to get the users in my Azure Active Directory, called get users collection async in this case. And I'm using this one to list the current users in my Azure Active Directory. Another interesting method here is get subscribed SKUs async, which I use to get available services that I have in Office 365 that I can assign, or licenses actually, that I can assign to the user that I've just added. And there is also get groups async, and there is another method here which is interesting called add user async, which will be used to add the user to the Azure Active Directory. But just because you add a user to your Active Directory doesn't mean that they have a license or a mailbox. So that's why I need to find and assign a license to that user, like this, assign license async. And most of these methods are accessed now from what I call the Active Directory controller. It's an okay name for this small API that I'm just playing around with, but probably gonna rename and move things around a little bit later on. But this is probably gonna be part of more of a microservices solution, so that's why I'm not over engineering anything. I'm trying to keep it very simple. You see, I don't even have a domain layer. I have nothing like that. I'm trying to keep it really small. So in this controller, I have a add user request model, and it looks like this: first name, last name, email, alternative email, which is the original email of the user before they are added to the organization. So I have somewhere to send the generated password and maybe some other information that I want to pass along to that user. I usually use Postmark to send emails because I think it's by far the best service if you're not sending promotional or bulk transaction email. I have a phone as well. You can see it's not required, but I think this is pretty new actually, the phone attribute to where you get some validation on, and I'm using this E.164 standard. starting with plus country code. Job title is important for us because we primarily work with software development, user experience, research design. So I would like to know what the job title is for this person, and I also want to be able to see that when I browse people in the Active Directory or in Office 365 later. And the job title will be visible in when you're inviting people in your calendar or sending an email to them. So that's important for us. The office location is, in this case, Gothenburg, Stockholm, or another location yet to be announced. Preferred language, obviously in this case I'm setting the default to American English. I really don't know why, but I'm doing that anyways now as a default. Okay, so this is the model that I'm using to this is the API model that I'm using to well, in the API, in this endpoint, first of all. So what are we doing here? First, we check that the model state is okay, that all required fields have been entered. And then we go and get the services or the licenses that are available. And we're looking specifically for the Office 365 Business Essentials, which is what we're using as default. Then we might upgrade people to premium afterwards, but this is the license that I would like to use. So you see that I'm using first a default. So we have a SKU here with an ID that we're using later on. But in this case, I really don't need to do this. This is just for playing around, like looking at. You see that I'm also logging the users to see the users that I have in my Azure Active Directory now, just for playing around. The same thing with groups. And in this case, I'm returning OK before. But this is what I'm gonna do now. So I'm gonna add user async, sorry. And you see that I'm building a user model here from, and it's located under Microsoft Graph. I'm building that object from the information that I have in my model, which is first name, last name. You see that it's not the same. It's called given name and surname in this user model. Office location is the same. Company name, I'm setting that there's no other company that I'm working with at this moment, so I know that this is a constant. I probably could move it to a constant somewhere. City will be the same as office location. It doesn't have to be. I mean, you can have several offices in the same city and some other way of naming your offices, but for us it works just fine. Display name, first name, last name. Job title is the same. Business phones, you can have a number of business phones. For us, one works fine. And I'm also setting the model.email. You can see that in this case, I'm not using the alternative email property because I really don't need it at this time. I'm just testing to see if I can set up a new user and add a license to her or him. And that's what's going on here. So if user has been added and if SKU exists and I have an ID, then I'm trying to assign a license to this newly added user like this. Finding the user by principal name. Assigning licenses. This is obviously an array because it could be more than just a license, or actually it's a list. And I don't remove any licenses. There is a secondary parameter here where you can remove already existing licenses. I'm not gonna do that. Instead, I'm just gonna post. So this is an SDK wrapping around the Graph API, REST API. You could obviously just do raw requests against the REST API, but I think the SDK is pretty good actually. All right. Let's go back into the controller, remove this OK, and try it out. I'm gonna run it. Yeah, and here you can see the Swagger, which is now included per default in .NET 5. And I have JSON prepared actually that I'm gonna use. and you can see that I will remove some information because this is actually a real person that I will be using, so you might not see it, but the point is we have first name, last name, email, alternative email, phone, job title, and office location. So I'm gonna click try it out, and I'm gonna enter the JSON like this. And another thing that I always like to do is set a breakpoint before I even start, so I can see, yeah, okay, so you see I have a breakpoint here at the first row to see what happens, because I haven't tried this before actually. This probably won't work as it is the first time I'm doing this. All right, gonna click execute. There we go, and you can see that my breakpoint is hit. Let's move through it. I'm gonna just step through it. All right, we see that. Okay, I got my SKUs, and I got 5 of them. We have Windows Store Flow Free. I have Office 365 Business Premium, which is something that we might upgrade the user to, but not from default. We have Power BI Standard. I think this is included for free, but I won't be adding that license. And we have Office 365 Business Essentials, the one we're looking for. So I think I found the right one here. Yeah, we have one. Great. And you see that I have a SKU ID, which will be used later on. All right. This I'm gonna just pass through. I'm gonna set another breakpoint here, and I'm just gonna move forward. This just basically just logs my users and my groups to a log file that I have on D:. This will be more interesting because this is the first time I'm gonna run this particular method, add user async, and this is a new user. This is an actual user that I want to add. So I'm gonna step into it with F11 here. Yeah, okay. I have a user set up. Might be blurring some stuff out here, but let's see if everything is correct. Yeah, seems to be good as far as I can tell. Okay, moving right along. Oh, there it crashed. Oh, okay. Then, well, what I would like to do is generate a password. Let's see if this works, or if I need to implement that as well. I'm gonna stop running this, and for the purpose of this example, I'm just gonna add a password. And I'm gonna set this to required property as well, because obviously it is required. And let's take a look at this request again. Yeah, first of all, I might have to pass password here. Password profile. It's I'm gonna just take a wild chance that force change password. Yes, I would like to do that. Next, sign in, and what else? Additional data. Ooh, data type. I'm just gonna try and see if this works. Adding a password profile, forcing the user to change the password the next time. I'll probably have to fix this later by generating a password somehow. I don't think there is a possibility to do it here, but there are probably a bunch of plugins and or packages or whatever I can use. But for the purpose of this exercise, I'm just gonna use a password that I submit with the model that I send in to the controller. All right. There we go. Okay, so I'm running it again, and I'm just gonna actually remove those two, and I'm gonna rerun this one. and click execute again. Why not? Because I haven't set password. Okay, so I need to set some sort of password. And it probably has some internal mechanism testing the strength of the password. So I'm gonna set a few big ones, some letters, some special signs, and some small letters. And I'm gonna click execute again. Okay, this time it worked a little bit better. I'm just gonna let it rip now until I come down to the request that I'm testing. And then we're gonna move into this one and see what happens. Okay, crashed again. What now? Resource that does not exist, or one of its query referenced objects are not present. I think I need to add some properties that were missing. So I'm gonna stop the API and I'm gonna try to add them. I think there is 3 properties that I've omitted in my request that might be necessary, and actually we can take a look at the documentation, see if it says anything. It will be interesting to see if it says anything. Let's see. Okay, so create user is the one that we're looking at. Following table list properties that are required when you create a user, if you're including identities. Okay, not all properties listed are required. Not all properties listed are required. Okay. Because I'm guessing that there is something here that I'm omitting that I need. The resource ID does not exist might not be the best of error messages that I can get. I believe that I need to provide a user principal name. And I believe that I need to provide a required mail nickname. And maybe I also need to set the account enable property. I don't know, but we're gonna try it out. All right, first thing is user dot, and I'm gonna set it here because this is not something that I would like to be modifiable in the request to this API. Instead, I'll just make it default. I think mail nickname requires to be 1 string without any I don't think you're allowed to have spaces or anything like that in the mail nickname, but I'm gonna set, so I'm just gonna set it to the first name. This is a little bit more tricky, I think, user principal name. I'm not really sure exactly what it needs to be. In the best case, it would probably be first name, or given name in this case, at queenslab.se, but I'm not sure you can do that. I think you actually need to use this queenslab on Microsoft.com as the user principal name. Not sure, but I'm gonna do that anyway from the start because I think that's okay. So we don't know in this case if there is already someone with the given name at queenslab.se, so I'm gonna take it for granted that we already have one, and I'm gonna use the first name dot last name, just or surname. I'm gonna do 2 lower here. I don't know if it has if it is important or not, but this is the user principal name that you normally see added by default if you add a user in the Office 365 administrative portal. So I'm gonna use this one, and we are going to restart it. There we go. Closing this one and executing. You can see that I have a result now, and the user has been added. Okay, So now I should be able, because the user has been added already, it doesn't have any licenses and it doesn't have a mailbox, but I should be able now to see the user if I'm going into the Office 365 admin portal. Going into the admin portal, and there we go. There is the user. And you can see it's well, this is in Swedish, but it says unlicensed here. Okay, so we're moving back, and what happens next? Stepping through, we have using the user principal name, we have the SKU ID, stepping into the assign license async method and see what happens here. I'm not sure that a null value is going to work for the remove licenses. I might need an empty list or something, but well, let's see what happens if we just... Boom, that didn't go too well. And what happened? Yeah, exactly. Remove licenses is a required parameter for this method request, okay? I don't want to remove any licenses. Why can't I provide null? Okay, so going back to code, I'm gonna close this one, and let's then see what we can do with the remove licenses. I don't want new list, maybe grids, yeah? An empty list might be better, I don't know, but obviously I also need to go back to the admin user interface of Office 365 and remove this user, because otherwise I'm gonna try to add the same user again. So I'm gonna click delete, and I'm gonna delete this user. And great, so we're going back to the code. Okay, let's run it again. Now I would probably not need to worry about this. I can just go to result. You see that the user has been added. Let's keep stepping and see what happens now when we try to assign the licenses. Let's go back to see if we get an error message. Yeah, we did. This is exactly what I thought. Okay, subscription with SKU and degwid does not have any available licenses. You know what? I'm gonna leave us here today. I think I'm gonna have to buy the licenses manually, and if I buy like 10 licenses and have them ready, then I might be able to do this. But that's not what I want. I want to have everything automated. But you can see at least a little of the things that you can do. You can add a user, you can add them unlicensed at least, and you can set up some information about the user. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this quick little code lounge today on how to integrate web API with Azure Active Directory using Microsoft Graph API. And hope to see you soon again. Take care. Bye.